The winter had come early that year, blanketing the wide-open plains in a thick, unbroken sheet of snow. The wind blew with a biting chill, carrying sharp, stinging flakes that cut across exposed skin. Among the desolate fields, a young mother knelt on the frozen ground, her fingers raw and trembling as she scraped at the earth. The snow made it difficult to dig, and the cold seeped through her thin gloves, but she continued, driven by a grief too deep for words. Her small child, bundled in a faded blanket, lay quietly beside her. The lifeless little body was pale, frozen almost as if the snow itself had claimed him before she could. Her breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps, visible in the cold air as thin clouds. She whispered apologies, soft murmurs that mingled with the howl of the winter wind. I'm so sorry, my love," she repeated, tears freezing on her cheeks, creating streaks that glittered like frost under the pale winter sunlight. The world around her was quiet, eerily still, except for the whisper of snow falling and the distant creak of tree branches burdened with ice. No one else was around, the nearest farmhouse was miles away, and she had no one to turn to. Her hands were raw, her nails cracked and bleeding from scraping at the frozen earth, but she persisted. Each shovelful felt heavier than the last, each movement a silent act of desperation. She tried not to think about the permanence of what she was doing, but her mind refused to rest. The child's small, pale face haunted her, and she gritted her teeth against the sobs threatening to break free. She had imagined this moment countless times in her darkest nightmares, but never had she expected to face it alone, in a field blanketed in snow. From a distance, the sound of hooves broke the silent monotony. A man on horseback appeared, his figure outlined against the pale sky. He was a rancher, checking the fences along the property, bundled in a thick coat and hat, boots sinking into the snow. At first, he thought the figure in the distance was someone gathering firewood, but as he drew closer, the gravity of the scene became clear. The woman's frantic, trembling movements and the small bundle beside her told him immediately that she was burying a child. His heart tightened, and without hesitation, he urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves crunching through the deep snow, stopping just a few feet away. The mother looked up, startled, her white eyes filled with raw pain and shock. The stranger dismounted quickly, boots crunching in the icy ground, and held out his hands. "You don't have to do this alone," he said gently. His voice was calm, steady, carrying warmth she hadn't felt in hours. She stared at him, too stunned to speak, the wind whipping her hair into her face. But she didn't move him away. Somehow, the presence of another human being, a stranger willing to help, gave her the tiniest spark of comfort amid the crushing sorrow. Together, though words were scarce, they began the unimaginable task of digging a grave in the merciless snow, two figures bound by grief, determination, and an unspoken understanding. The rancher knelt beside her, the cold biting through his thick gloves, but he didn't flinch. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said again, his voice low, steady, carrying a quiet authority that somehow eased her frantic heart. She looked at him, wide-eyed and trembling, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But there was no malice in his eyes, only concern, and slowly, she nodded. She handed him the small, worn shovel, the metal handle icy in his grasp. Together, they dug into the frozen earth, each shovelful heavy and resistant, the snow stubbornly refusing to let go of the soil beneath. Her hands shook violently as she worked, the rawness of the cold mixing with the ache in her chest. The rancher didn't speak much, he simply moved alongside her, matching her rhythm, silently sharing the unbearable weight of the task. Occasionally, he glanced at her, giving a small nod or offering a look that said, without words, "You're not alone." It was a simple gesture, yet in the midst of her grief, it felt monumental. The snow swirled around them, settling in their hair and coats, but they ignored it, absorbed in the grim task at hand. She paused for a moment, leaning on the shovel, her face buried in her hands. The wind stole her muffled sobs, carrying them across the empty plains. I should have kept him warm. I should have," she whispered, the guilt and sorrow pressing on her chest like a physical weight. The rancher put a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did everything you could. Sometimes, even our best isn't enough, but that doesn't mean you failed," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. She looked at him, tears mixing with snowflakes on her cheeks. There was a strange comfort in hearing words that didn't try to minimize her pain, that didn't offer hollow reassurances. The rancher simply acknowledged the truth, grief, loss, and the unbearable loneliness that came with it. Together, they worked on, shoveling and scraping, each spadeful of earth a silent act of love and respect for the child she had lost. Hours seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. The pale light of afternoon shifted toward the gray of evening, and the cold gnawed deeper into their bones. Yet, the task continued, steady, deliberate. The rancher offered her a hand to steady herself when her knees buckled, a scarf to keep the biting wind from her face, small gestures of humanity that spoke louder than any words could. Finally, the hole was deep enough, the soil cleared and the snow brushed aside. The child's small body, wrapped in the thin blanket, rested in the shallow grave. The mother knelt beside it, placing her hands gently on the tiny chest, whispering soft, broken words of farewell. The rancher stood quietly, giving her space, but remaining close, a silent guardian in the bitter cold. In that frozen field, amid grief and sorrow, the presence of another human being, someone willing to share her unbearable burden, was a faint, fragile light. The last shovelful of snow and dirt fell into the grave, settling around the small body with a muted finality. The mother's hands lingered on the mound, trembling, as if trying to hold onto what was gone. She pressed her forehead to the cold earth, whispering a string of broken words, a soft lullaby mixed with apologies. The wind carried them away, scattering her grief across the vast plains. She felt hollow, as if a piece of herself had been buried with her child. Yet amidst the unbearable sorrow, the rancher's steady presence beside her offered a strange comfort, a reminder that even in the harshest winter, she wasn't completely alone. Her eyes rose slowly, red and swollen, and she met his gaze. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice barely audible, choked with grief. The rancher shook his head slightly, a small, solemn smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes, you just do what's right," he replied. He didn't offer platitudes or try to lessen the weight of her pain. Instead, he simply stood there, silent, letting her feel what she needed to feel. The snow continued to fall around them, soft and relentless, covering the plains in a quiet, glimmering blanket, and the gray sky seemed to mirror the heaviness of their hearts. The mother placed a small, worn toy atop the grave, a tiny wooden horse, one of her child's favorites. She ran her fingers over it gently, brushing away the snowflakes that had settled on its surface. "Goodbye, my sweet love," she whispered, her voice breaking. She straightened slowly, glancing at the rancher. There was a flicker of gratitude, sadness, and something she hadn't expected, relief. The unbearable isolation that had pressed on her chest all day had been lifted, if only slightly, by his quiet support. The rancher waited patiently as she gathered herself, offering no rush, no intrusive words. When she finally turned to him fully, she managed a faint smile. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Does it matter?" He replied with a shrug. "We did what needed to be done. That's enough." There was a simplicity to his answer, a truth that resonated with her. In the midst of unimaginable loss, sometimes the smallest gestures, the presence of someone willing to stand with you, were the most meaningful. They stood together for a moment longer, the wind swirling around them, snowflakes catching in their hair and coats. The world seemed frozen, vast, and indifferent, yet in that frozen field, a small act of human kindness had left its mark. The mother felt an odd mix of sorrow and solace, the raw pain of grief softened just enough by the silent support of another soul. Finally, she turned and walked slowly back toward her cabin in the distance, each step leaving a mark in the fresh snow. The rancher watched her go, then mounted his horse, heading back toward his own land. They parted without another word, yet an unspoken bond lingered between them, two hearts forever connected by grief, loss, and the quiet humanity that had bridged the coldest, loneliest winter day. In the heart of that vast, frozen wilderness, they had both glimpsed the warmth that even sorrow cannot entirely extinguish.